Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I am speaking with Paul Galletta. Paul is a former member of the school board in New York State, and I started noticing Paul because I was looking into some of the stuff that's going around critical race theory, and then I started noticing it was getting into education curriculums, and Paul was looking into that. So I got interested in it, and I was hoping to speak to Paul, see what he's found, and his concerns, and where this is coming from. Hey Paul, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Obaid, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Right on. So listen, first of all, I appreciate you having me on and helping shed light on this issue. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is just kind of give a general overview of kind of this worldview, this ideology that's coming into the school systems, and then maybe explain a little bit of my background on how, relevant background, how I came to find out about it.
That works, man.
Okay. Yeah. So generally, there's a worldview and ideology that's been growing for the past few decades, mostly in universities and academia, and it's now starting to enter into and be implemented into the K-12 education system. Now, as you mentioned, I'm a former school board member in New York State, and so I'm looking at this more from specifically what's happening in New York State, but also what's happening in the United States. I know you're up in Canada, and I know it seems like you guys are dealing with the same issues up there as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, let me just explain kind of the worldview briefly. This ideology kind of separates and categorizes people primarily based on their group identity. And then it looks at these groups in terms of privilege and oppression, based on those identities. And then it views any disparities or inequities or gaps between these groups as being a result of structural and systemic power imbalances. And these power imbalances, they look at as throughout our entire society. And you'll hear it referred to a lot as the status quo, or the dominant narrative, or the master narrative, or whiteness. It's even referred to as whiteness. And these power imbalances that are throughout society must be disrupted and dismantled in order for other groups to gain power and achieve equity. Now, there was a lot going on in that description that we'll talk about and discuss, throughout our conversation here. But on top of that, the worldview, it looks at these structural imbalances coming from, it kind of describes these structural imbalances in terms of racism, cis-hetero patriarchy, settler colonialism, and white supremacy. Right, so it sees these as structural problems in our society, and they're not looked at as individual acts. It's structural, systemic things that are kind of like in the air we breathe, or it's referred to as kind of like in the water that we swim in. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to. I just want to like that what you're talking about. The way I try to describe to my friends who like can't get their heads around it. I say, like, if you take a hypothetical that there was, just take the United States, right? You could empirically prove that there was no racist act committed in the United States in the last 50 years. Like, you can prove it. Like, not one person thought something, not one person said something, did something. Everything was equitable, right? And they would still say the system is racist because its founding was racist, so racism has infused the whole system, right? That's how I try to explain it to my friends. And I don't know if you see it that way.
Yes, and in fact, you see this in the New York Times, the 1619 Project, and how they're trying to kind of reframe the founding of the United States, not on July 4th, 1776, but in 1619, when the first slaves were brought over, and they're trying to reframe the whole founding of the United States based on that. And not only, so that's also being prepared for to start being implemented in schools as well. So just on top of that, if you were to suggest that, some of these inequities, these gaps, these disparities, there might be some other contributing factors going on here, then even saying that you would be considered a bigot, right? It's only looked at as these structural, systemic problems. Not to say that they don't recognize individual acts, but they say that those are just manifestations of a structural problem.
Yeah, okay, you mentioned the New York Times. And these are opinion pieces, it's editorial section, but it was the front page of the editorial. It was from the editorial staff. It wasn't even someone writing in a letter, right? So I think it was in Brooklyn. There was 2 black girls and 2 Latino girls were fighting. I can't remember who started it and who beat who up, right? That's kind of immaterial. But the editorial piece said that they learned this because of whiteness, and this is showing white supremacy in action because it's getting 2 immigrant groups to fight against each other for the white majority. Now, that's all the fit that's print. All the news that's fit to print, like the New York Times, like the paper of record is saying that when 2 minorities fight, it's because of white people.
Well, that's the foundation of the worldview, and that's where it's coming from. And yes, you are seeing more and more behavioral problems and conflict among students in schools. And this is one thing I want to kind of give you a heads up on, and I'll mention this again later maybe. I mean, this is still in the very early stages of implementation. Now some places are ahead of others. But this is still in the very early stages of implementation, and as this comes in, you're going to see more conflict between students, between teachers. I mean, this is really what it's at its base. It's designed to create that conflict, and we'll see a little bit later. We could talk about how the teachers and the students are being kind of indoctrinated into this. The way I started to become aware of this was, I have 2 sons. One just graduated high school last year. The other one's in 11th grade. So I spent the last 10 or so years very involved in my local school district. A PTA member, being involved in various building level committees and district level committees. And eventually I ran for the school board and served 1 term on the school board, which I just finished at the end of last school year. And throughout this time, I was seeing things happening in the schools that I didn't really fully understand. It wasn't really making sense to me a whole lot, but it didn't really seem like that big of a deal. One of the things was, the emphasis on, diversity and inclusion and equity. And of course, these are very reasonable sounding words, ideas, right? So you're in these committee meetings or these, whatever meetings you're at, and you're hearing these terms and being discussed, and you don't really ask too much questions because it sounds kind of reasonable. So I can see how people kind of can easily be misled or kind of tricked or not really understand what's going on.
Sorry, like that. Yeah. That's I don't know if you read Kindly Inquisitors. I mean, I keep talking about this book lately.
Absolutely.
The humanitarian threat. Because if you ask a bunch of parents, we're going to bring in this diversity stuff because we want to fight racism. Like, unless you're David Duke, or Richard Spencer, you're not going to say, no, I don't want to fight racism. Everyone said, yeah, we should fight racism.
Sure.
But they don't. That's all the thought they give it, right? They don't think beyond that. The schools are teaching kids not to be racist. That's good. And they don't look where it comes from.
And obviously they remember being in school and probably, or just even growing up with their parents or whatever, being taught not to be racist and things like that. It all seems very, very reasonable, very, things that you would want to do, without understanding the real meaning behind this new worldview that is very, very different, I think, than what most people, certainly our age, kind of grew up with. Yeah. So that's the education track, you know. So I spent a lot of time involved in that and seeing things, but not really understanding it. Certainly, I'll tell you what though, when I started hearing equity, you know, you could tell there was something going on there, and I want to spend a little time talking about that in a few minutes. But the equity thing is definitely something to pay attention to. So anyway, so that's one track that I was going on. Another track that I was going on was just my general interest in, you know, in social and cultural and political issues and just kind of, you know, what's going on in society, right? So, and to be honest with you, I mean, the way things have been the past, you know, 5-10 years or whatever, it seems like everything's kind of out of control. It's like things aren't making sense, right? You know, from my perspective anyway, trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah, well, you and me
and
both.
I know you had mentioned that, you know, you were out of the country for a period of time and you came back and things kind of had changed, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was it. Like I left in 2002. No social media, right? And I was on military bases in war zones. So even when social media first came out, not allowed to use it. You know, it's they don't know this. Then later on, slightly better. Like they opened it up a little bit, so you had some access. But I didn't spend time on it. I didn't know what was going on. And I come back to North America, and I come back to Canada, and I see, oh, you're not allowed to talk about this. You know, I see that professor in Missouri asking for asking for people to, a journalism professor at you know, Missouri State or University of Missouri, like Mizzou, right?
Yep.
She's asking for people to come and beat up a student journalist because he's covering a protest, and she's a journalism professor. Now, she ended up getting fired, but how is that teaching? And that's when I started looking into this stuff. I'm like, what's going on? And I mean, even back then, like this was in 2014. I think in 2015, like a book from, I think it was junior year high school level in British Columbia came out, textbook, and they were teaching kids this stuff then. So like it's been a few years that it's gotten into the school system, and it's just slowly going down. Like it's slowly going down. Like it was in higher levels. Now it's going to lower levels. When I say going down,
right, it's good, right. Coming into the lower grades, elementary and secondary school. So I was trying to figure out what was going on. I came across a Jordan Peterson video. Just looking, I was kind of researching a different subject. I had never heard of him before. I just happened to come across a video, and I watched it, and it seemed interesting. So I started paying more attention. You know, listening to what he had to say. And then that's when I started learning about postmodernism. That was the first time I was kind of like exposed to postmodernism. Now, I know, you know, from listening to some of your earlier podcasts, you know, you have, well, I don't want to describe your views on Jordan Peterson, but you may have a little bit different views than I do. Regardless, it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that that's what kind of got me interested in and learning about postmodernism, because it started to make sense with things that I was starting to see. So he kind of opened me up to a lot of other writers through Quillette magazine and Ariel magazine and a lot of these other other resources. That's when I came across Helen Pluckrose, right? I saw her on one of the podcasts, and she was explaining that she had a little bit different view than Jordan. And I thought that was interesting because I wanted to learn about it from as many different angles as I could, right? Because I didn't take it from one source. So, you know, once I started learning about postmodernism and, you know, through Helen and then finding James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian and Mike Nana and learning about the grievance studies project that they did, right? So I'm seeing this and I'm learning more about postmodernism and critical theory, and it clicked to me that what I was seeing in education was connected to this whole postmodernism critical theory ideology. And that's when I mean, literally it was like I was horrified because all the pieces started coming together and you could see what was happening. And that's when I really started digging into what exactly was going on in the schools. I went to one of my local school board meetings and started to try to raise awareness with them just to give them a heads up. But as you know, there's a tremendous amount of information behind this, a tremendous amount of background information that you have to know. Like, I'm sure you spent hours and hours and hours, right?
Oh, yeah.
Trying to read and watch interviews on postmodernism and critical theory. And, people were asking me questions about it. So I decided to make some YouTube videos so that I could present the information, so that people could watch it if they wanted to, or, at least start to get a general idea what it's all about.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, I finished university in the mid-90s. Now, that's when intersectionality, postmodernism has already been in the schools. Like, and I did political science, so I was in the humanities, so I was getting some of this, right? I was getting the cultural relativism, and I was talking about the power and all that stuff, but it didn't stick, and it wasn't being taught like that. So I mean, that stuff started coming in, like, so I saw a bit of this, not really knowing what it was, and not really paying attention, because I'm like, yeah, this is stupid, and I'm leaving, and I don't have to worry about it. But yeah, it's slowly morphed. Like, my theory on this is, and this is completely, you can tell me I'm Alex Jones, and you can tell me this is tinfoil hat, I don't know, but the way I look at it was, so you had the stuff in the 60s coming in, so postmodernism came in. And then you had the civil rights movements, and you had the anti-war protests, you had women's rights, you had all that stuff coming through. And people were like, okay, you know what? It's not good to be racist. It's not good to be sexist. It's not good to be, homophobic, whatever. And I agree with all those things. It's not. And so I think they thought, okay, well, maybe we can tell kids about this stuff. It's out there, whatever. So it comes in in very benign. And then they're like, okay, well, we're going to teach this to kids, so we need to teach teachers how to teach this. And then I think like a slow progression of this stuff built up, and it was just built up on one paper after another, people going in, getting PhDs, and getting a stamp of approval, like what Brett Weinstein called ideal laundry. Because
right,
I mean, there is some the underpinning of this stuff is important, and it talks about some important issues. The way it goes about it is all wrong. And so then, this is how I see it happening. And so these people came in, and then now I like the College of Educators or whatever, like how this stuff has influenced that. They slowly started coming into the administration. My take on this current iteration of it is, around 2000, the first people who were going through gender studies and diversity studies taught on this basis graduated. So they came in as interns in the government, took entry-level positions at university administrations, maybe in school boards, maybe, we want to do an anti-racism campaign. This guy's got a PhD in diversity studies. Let's hire them, right? Or it's, so it makes
right.
sense. That's who you're going to go for, because that's where the expertise is. And then 2000, unfortunately, was also George W. Bush, whatever you want to, however you feel about it. But I think that was a catalyst, because 9/11 happened. There was that's when everything became narrative driven. That was when, these racists are in the office, we have to push back. And so you had all these diversity offices coming up. I think that was a catalyst that got it to grow faster than it should have. Then the internet happened and social media happened, and it spread.
Sure, and then just boom.
Yeah, and so it started metastasizing. I'm going to say metastasizing because it is like a cancer. It's just growing, it's spreading within, and the more of it you have, the more of it needs. I mean, you hear about universities with more administrators than faculty, and you wonder why universities are expensive. I was just speaking with someone you mentioned in one of your videos, Will Roosh. I was just speaking with him.
Yes.
And he's talking about how the funds are being badly allocated, especially in poorer schools, like Title I schools, right? So they'll spend money on an administrator, but you can't put pencil sharpeners in classrooms. So that's where I'm thinking this stuff came in. It was just, we need to work on racism. It's an issue, and they slowly brought this stuff in because it just seemed like they were the only people who had a solution. And it was, I don't know, like I said, this could be tinfoil hat. I might not know anything I'm talking about, but that's the way it seems to me from the outside.
No, and James Lindsay said this, the kind of the goal of social justice is to make everything about social justice. So it just kind of slowly creeps, it slowly builds and adds to it, and more and more. So that's why you're seeing this blow of administrative oversight and diversity and equity. Administrators, it's just continuing to grow. Well, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you want to start talking about some of these things like diversity, like when people hear diversity, it sounds like a good thing. But the way it's described, if you want to give your impression of how they're teaching diversity in classrooms, and I'll tell you like my take on it and how I see it and where I see the problems are. Because I don't know, like I know curriculums, I've been looking at curriculums, I've been seeing it, but I don't go to school board meetings, I don't go to anything like that here. So you might have a better idea of like how it's being defined in classrooms and what you think of it. And I can tell you like my idea of what I think diversity, like how they're defining it and how they're using it.
So they're all vaguely defined, yeah. Right? And it really comes down to whoever's talking about it, whatever is in their mind is what it means, right? But what is in their mind and what is in your mind could be completely different things. The one term I'd like to spend a little bit of time on is equity, sure. Because that is the foundation of the worldview of this whole kind of program that's being implemented. So when you hear equity, it's like what the hell does that mean, right? I mean, it kind of sounds a little bit like equality. It sounds like it might mean something good. But if you ask, first of all, administrators, you hear administrators talk about equity quite a bit. But if you were to ask, whatever number of teachers or administrators what equity means, right? You're going to get however many people you ask. That's how many different definitions you're going to get, because they don't even really know. It's such a vague term. Kind of what I've boiled it down to is it boils down to fairness. That's kind of like the core idea behind it. It's fairness, and it's fairness in the form of socially constructed, fair, or equitable or fair outcomes, right? So what the heck does that mean? I mean, that's like you're trying to institute some type of equity code or equity policy. It's kind of like the same thing with trying to bring in a hate speech code. Right? I mean, it means different things to different people. And that's a huge problem right off the bat. This entire program is based on this foundation, which is basically meaningless. Or it can mean anything.
Yeah. Okay. The way I see equity is this. It's like, okay, the people, okay, they're not even going to say that we had equal opportunity. They're going to say, no, you don't, which I think is BS. I think, starting from about the mid 80s, the laws at least were there, so legally you had equal opportunity. But now, when they say equity, they're like saying, okay, there's been a disadvantage. And this group has been disadvantaged for this long. I mean, take whatever group you want. To get it equitable now, so if before you had, let's say in the STEM fields, it was 70% white men and 30% everything else, you need to have a reversal, so, for a certain amount of time to get the numbers equal of everyone else and bring the numbers of white men down. So for them, equity means white men step aside, give your positions up. Even if there's no one there, then let it go unfilled, right? There's a really horrific book called The Wretched of the Earth. It's by a guy named Frantz Fanon. He was a French or Algerian sociologist, and he was spending time with the freedom fighters in Algeria when they were fighting for the liberation from France. And he wrote in that book that the only way the underprivileged will ever get over the scars of being oppressed, like the only way the oppressed will ever get rid of the scars of being oppressed, is if for an equal amount of time they oppress their oppressors.
Right.
And that's what this equity stuff is. You were in power for so long. You had it so good. We don't care how equal you're making it now. We don't care how much ease you're giving everyone. We don't care that it was getting better until, Group X can lord it over you for the same amount of time. Then it's not equitable. And it's, like I can't remember who I heard say this. Like if someone says equity, ask them why did they say equity and not equal? Because there's a difference between the two terms. You want it equitable, you don't want it equal.
Right. So, and exactly. So so given your research and your background, you have a more defined definition of what equity is, right? So I was referring to when you go early on, when you go to these school board meetings or not necessarily school board meetings, but even just school building meetings or whatever it is, and they're talking about equity. When I said it can mean anything, when people are sitting there, unless they have all that background information, that the stuff that you're aware of, right? It really is a very vague term that could mean anything. But in fact, it has a much deeper meaning, which you just kind of started to explain. If you don't mind, I'm going to read a couple definitions of equity, just so we can start putting this into perspective. So this is from the New York State Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework, right? That the state, our State Board of Regents has adopted and is starting to be pushed into schools, right? So equity is the state quality or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. The concept of equity is synonymous with fairness and justice. To be achieved and sustained, equity needs to be thought of as a structural and systemic concept and not as idealistic. Equity is a robust system and dynamic process that reinforces and replicates equitable ideas, power, resources, strategies, conditions, habits, and outcomes, right? So you can, it's still kind of vague, but you can see the hints of the structural and systemic problems that it's trying to address. And they're defining equity in terms of being equitable, right? So what the hell does that mean, right? And like I said, the whole equity thing is kind of boils down to fairness in the mind of whoever is talking about it. And you talked about kind of like that power shift, that is what is fair to what is to the proponents of this worldview. And I just want to read one more, which kind of gets even further into it. And this definition is from Washington State government. They formed a committee on equity, and this is a draft definition. Actually, I just saw this recently on Benjamin Boyce's YouTube channel. He did a whole.
I saw that. It's nuts.
You saw that, right? Yeah. So I mean, I recommend anybody to watch that. So anyway, this is the definition that they've come up with. Equity is the path to well-being that allows each person to thrive. It is an evolving, community-centered journey towards healing that requires shifting power to disrupt and dismantle deeply entrenched systems of privilege and oppression. Equity allows the fullest expression of dignity, honor, and respect that we all deserve. Right? So once again, it's sprinkled with these flowery, feel-good words, but also if you know the ideology behind it, you can see the danger that's in it, right? The shifting of power, the disrupting and dismantling entrenched systems. This is what equity is. This is really what it is.
Yeah. Okay. And like it's to me, okay. Like we're talking like because when it's coming to schools, especially K through 12, and I was speaking to Carrie Smith the other day. And she was talking about like something she saw in New York for, I think she said it was for like 4 and 5 year olds. And they were telling them that if you're on time, you're acting white. Okay? Yep. If you get your work done when you're supposed to, you're acting white. Now, I understand teaching kids, like, I remember when I was young, like, oh, you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't treat people differently because they're a different color, all of that. That's normal. That's good, right?
Yes.
But if you're teaching, because you can't explain to a 4-year-old all this background theory, because
no,
it won't.
Listen, trying to explain it to adults, they look at you like you're telling them like you were visited by aliens or something. Like you talk to them anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah, but if you keep telling a kid that if you're white, you were. Your people were the mean people. They did all this bad stuff. Your people have always been bad. That's basically what they're telling them. And if they tell kids who aren't white, those are the kids who made it hard for you. You'll never be able to succeed in this world because of them. Like, I don't see how that's gonna, like, once they do start getting older and they read this stuff, they've already been taught to think that way. And now the explanation makes sense. Whereas if they were taught to think the other way and they read the explanation, most people would say, this is
ask some questions.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, but I know a lot of people do it. I'm not the only person. I equate it to religion. If you start kids young, from birth, and you teach them about it, you indoctrinate it, they're going to believe it. But if you let a kid grow up and let him learn how to think, whatever, and then at 18, you had him whatever religious book and try to give him that, he's going to say, well, maybe it doesn't make as much sense, right? And this stuff is exactly the same way. Unfortunately, it's got a little catch that religion doesn't, I don't think, that it can get people when they're a little bit older easier than religion can. I don't know. Like, it's got that, don't you want to stop racism, homophobia, whatever. It's got that little thing, right?
Sure. And to go back to how children are being affected by it. I don't know if you saw it, but Patrick Lockwood has a podcast. He recently did one with a parent who kind of explains his experience with his kid in elementary school, and how this was affecting her in terms of feeling bad about being white, and it was putting her into a depression. He actually, filed a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, and they pretty much wouldn't even acknowledge it. But if anybody gets a chance to listen to that, that'll give you like an example of how this is affecting young kids and as they're being taught this stuff.
Yeah, I spoke to Patrick as well, and I spoke to him about my concern, which was, like, I don't know if you remember back in the late 80s, like the Crips and the Bloods, and then you had like the white supremacist gangs as well.
Yep.
And if you listen to any of the police stuff, if you listen to any of the FBI stuff, or on the news or whatever, they talked about picking off loner kids. They talked about, like, they would go find a loner kid. They would go find the kids that were feeling disenfranchised, that were feeling picked on, that were feeling oppressed, that were feeling, oh, everyone's out to get me. Okay, you're raising a generation of kids to think that way. It's going to be easy pickings for any kind of extremist, like any kind, to say, oh, yeah. And so I was speaking to Patrick about that, because that's my real concern here is you're setting up kids to be weak and to be preyed upon and to be used for any kind of, it might seem like a feel-good thing, but it's going to end up being awful, and you're warping kids' minds.
So, Obey, that is absolutely my primary concern as well. I am worried about how this is, the effect that this is having on kids. I mean, listen, the adults, they should be responsible for whatever happens. You know what I'm saying, or whatever they want to think, or whatever they want to believe, or if this is coming into your workplace, if this is coming into your school, and you're a teacher, or if you're an administrator and you have concerns about that, it's up to you how you address that. But how this is being implemented and how harmful this is going to be to children, and I think this is long-term harm. This is not this is something. This is a mindset that they're being indoctrinated into. And that, I agree with you 100%. That's my major concern. But anyway, let's, even looking at equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at equity and you say, okay, well, first of all, in order to achieve it, what do you have to do? First, you have to identify some groups. Somebody has to kind of categorize people or identify, right? And
well, just that Washington State thing that Benjamin Boyce put up. I mean, they say like equity is to dismantle, basically tear apart the whole old system and create a whole new one, right? That's what that's what they mean by equity. Let's keep that forefront. They want to dismantle the old system.
Oh yeah, disrupt and dismantle. Yeah. That is the phrase. But in doing so too, right? They have to identify different groups.
Mm-hmm.
So who's gonna be in charge of deciding, what groups there are categorized? Who's categorized into what groups? And as long as there are inequities or disparities or gaps between these groups, there will always be calls for more equity. The work isn't done; it's never done. So the end of it, right? So what's the end game? Everybody is equal, till there's equal representation in every and across all different industries. I mean, you name it. It's a never-ending movement process towards this so-called equity that is really it's a utopian fantasy is really what it is. And behind it, like you just mentioned, is this whole disrupt and dismantle, tear down the system, and to give other people that want power. So they want to tear down the system in order to gain power.
I mean, if I had the time and the resources, I would like to put up workshops where you tell parents what this stuff actually means. Like, not you specifically, but like, where, if you want, like, but where people could do this. Because when they talk about the anti-racism stuff, right? And because this affects me. Like, when I was 14, I was taking the bus in Montreal, like the public transit, and on the seat back in front of me, someone wrote white power, black caca. Now, the only word they spelled correctly was caca. And I saw that, and I was 14 or 15, and I was like, I'm better than that person. And it's never bothered me since. Like, someone saying, oh, you're brown, you're okay. I'm like, I go back to seeing that little phrase, and I'm like, that's where your mentality is.
Right, that's the mentality you're dealing with.
But now, I've experienced it. Like, Canada's not an overtly racist country. It's, it's most places in North America aren't, I don't think. But it's here. But like this stuff, a friend of mine, she's from Pakistan. She grew up in Texas, brown. And I'm bringing up the identity because it's important here, because normally I couldn't care rat's ass.
Right.
She did a very measured thread on intersectionality and the harms it causes and the good it, like the intention, like the initial good that Kimberly Crenshaw wanted to do, and how it went off the rails almost all right away. And then the harms it does to those intersections that she's talking about. And she's like saying, okay, because she's, she talks a lot about ex-Muslim issues and stuff. And she's like, okay, so, a woman who wants to take off the hijab, because you're saying, oh, the hijab is a Muslim thing, if you speak out against it, you're being Islamophobic, that woman is being left out of the conversation and her needs aren't being met because of this, because intersectionality is not actually looking at that intersection. And it was like a very, very measured thread. Sarah is one of the most reasonable people you can come across. And
I actually saw that thread. I didn't get a chance to read all the way through it because of other things that I was looking at. But I did bookmark it. I'm definitely going to go back and look through it.
But if you look at the comments at the end from these people who are anti-racist, who are progressive, who are all these wonderful sounding things, want equity and want a fair and equitable world and all this crap, told her that she sounded white and she is thinking white. Okay?
That's right.
Because of this whiteness stuff you're talking about. Like,
yes.
I would love to sit parents down and say, this is what they mean by this stuff, because I'm sorry. If David Duke told a black person, you're sounding white, I mean, or whatever, Trump, or now Joe Rogan, I guess, said like, you're like the outcry, and rightfully so. But these people, I mean, they outright say it. And like that, to me, I find more racist than some guy in a KKK hood calling me a fucking towel head or a packy. All right? Like, some guy telling me that science and logic is a white way of knowing, and that if I think logically and I think scientifically and I think in a reasoned manner, I'm thinking white, and you want to be anti-racist? Like, no, screw you. Like to me, like, like the kids thing is very important to me, but on a personal level, this is where I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, how can how can you do that?
And it's about the narrative, right? It's really about whether you believe in that narrative and you are actively trying to promote that narrative. And at this point, it really doesn't matter the color of your skin or your sexual orientation or things like that, right? If you don't believe that dogma, if you don't believe that narrative, then you're not a part of that group. Even if you would technically be so-called put into these other categories under the worldview, if you don't believe in it, then you are shunned. You're pushed aside. You are considered complicit in whiteness. You're promoting whiteness is the status quo, the dominant narrative. Yeah. Right, that needs to be dismantled and destroyed and teared down.
No, but I mean, any reasonable parent, if they actually, and again, there's so many issues here. Like, parents don't have the time. Parents, you're being forced to take your kids everywhere. You can't let your kid go to the park by themselves when they're 10 because they're gonna call the cops or whatever. I mean, like all this stuff. So I mean, I don't expect the average parent to be able to sit down and read Kimberly Crenshaw or Patricia McIntosh or Barbara Applebaum or any of these people, like D'Angelo, any of this stuff, right? But if they can go to a 1-hour meeting and someone explains it to them exactly what it says, I don't think any parent would get behind it. Like, I don't see how they could.
So, I mean, to be honest with you, that's something that I've been trying to put together. But as you know, the amount of information, the amount of stuff that you have to try to explain to people, to try to narrow this down and explain it to them, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to boil down where you can get it in a presentation that's not hours and hours long, and to also to get them to, I guess, believe what's going on. I think part of it too is, they might have, even if you explain it to them, they might have a general idea of, in the abstract that, okay, this is something that I should be aware of, that is something that we should be concerned about, but it may not be, they may not see it directly impacting their kid right now, right? So, even though they might be concerned about it or understand, the dangers of it, because what you said before, everybody's so busy, going to work, taking their kids to, music lessons or sports practice or what, just constantly on the go. People, most people don't have the time to learn about all this stuff. And not only that, but to go to school board meetings, to read the documents, and to understand what's going on. So I mean, certainly, that plays into it as well. The challenge of trying to address this and trying to, raise more concern about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I keep derailing you here because what's being taught is important, but I think like a lot of this background stuff. I mean, there is some pushback to some of this, and hopefully it'll alleviate that. Like, I don't know if you know about free range kids.
Yes.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff, like that kind of pushback, where if parents just had a little bit of time, right? Parents need some time for themselves too. But if they had a little bit of time where you're 10 years old, you're 11 years old, the park's down the road, go play with your friends. If something happens, come back home. Now kids have cell phones. They can call their folks right away, right? Like, if more and more of that happens where, a parent might be able to say, well, what exactly is this curriculum? Like, if they, my sister was talking to me about this, and her son, he's 11 11 or 12. I'm a bad uncle. I can't remember how old my nephew is. He's in Chicago, and he's coming home telling her that there's 72 genders. And she's like, okay. And he's learning some of this identity stuff in Chicago, like the racism and things like that, privilege and power.
That's how there's. Well, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Yeah, but like she doesn't know where it comes from. She's like, what is this? And she works whatever. Maybe I shouldn't get her in trouble, but she works at the University of Chicago, and she's like, well, where's this stuff coming from? Like how, but she doesn't have the time to, it takes her an hour to drive to work, hour to drive home. Come home, cook. My brother-in-law's there too, but I mean, like they're busy parents.
Yeah, people are busy. They don't have time. They don't have the time, to sit down and read this stuff and to watch the interviews. I have that interest, right? It's something I'm interested in, so I make the time for it. It's something that I'm concerned about, and I see it as a huge danger and a very negative impact on kids and on our society as this continues to move forward. So obviously this is an important issue for me. So I put the time in it, and I know with you as well. So what's happening and how this is being kind of implemented into the schools. It's coming in under these. It's coming in under these programs. It's called culturally responsive education, right, or ethnic studies, and they're all under this kind of banner of equity, something which we've talked about, and it's kind of being pushed in two different ways. It's kind of there's like a bottom-up movement, which is kind of ahead of the top-down movement. And so when I refer to the bottom-up movement, it's more they're trying to get this into the minds of teachers, get this into the minds of students, right? So it's coming in through the teacher professional development workshops, their conferences, things like that. So, but the number one thing that the number one goal is to change mindsets, right? Prioritize mindsets. To change it into this new worldview so that they can get more people problematizing things and disrupting and dismantling and tearing things down, right? So literally, there was an article written by a couple of the early writers of the framework in New York, and literally the title of the article is "Prioritizing Mindsets." Right? This is what they're doing. They're going after. It's re-education. It's re-education. So, and one way they're doing this is through the implicit bias training, right? I'm sure you've seen some stuff on that around, right? So, but teachers are being put through this implicit bias training, where they're being indoctrinated into this worldview, and you can imagine, when if there's any concerns or questions raised, or maybe even a little pushback. What happens? They get accused of being a bigot. They get being accused of being a racist. So it ties in this whole white fragility, concept. And in fact, there's student workshops. There are teacher workshops dedicated to that. Robin DiAngelo's her book, White Fragility, her theory, where this is being indoctrinated into students and teachers. So that's how they're going after the teachers. Not only that, right? So you also have all these different teacher and education organizations, right? So in New York we have the State Teachers Union, New York State United Teachers, they're on board with this. The New York State School Boards Association is having conferences and pushing these ideas. New York State Council of School Superintendents, School Administrators Associations. So this is coming in from a lot of different directions, and I'm to me this is still like the bottom up. I'm referring to kind of the bottom up process of where it's coming from, because they're hiring consultants to bring this stuff in and to train them, right? And these consultants obviously are graduated from these critical theory programs and so they're pushing this stuff into the minds of teachers, right? So let me just give you an example of one, I guess, workshop or this is actually a series of workshops that teachers can attend. So this description is, participants unpack the meanings, uses of, and impacts on society of the terms white supremacy, white privilege, and white fragility. Right? Discussion of white people's resistance to talking about race, power, and privilege, as well as how white supremacy and white privilege promote the idea of black inferiority. Right? This is what's out there being taught in these conferences to teachers, that they're bringing back to their schools, back to their classrooms. So okay. That's one angle.
I don't know if you know about this, and I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but do you know that the College of Educators and the college, the colleges of education. So our teachers, so let's say you're getting your teaching degree, right? I don't know how it works in the States. Like in Canada, you can go into a degree for early childhood education or whatever, or you can do up to a master's level, then take a 1-year certificate, and then you can go teach. But are they infusing the training of educators with this stuff so that when these consultants or whatever come in, everyone's already kind of on the same starting page, right? So if you...
That's what's happening. The education programs are pushing this stuff into the minds of college students who are going to get their degrees in teaching, right? So they're coming out prepped. They're coming out prepped for this ideology, right? For bringing it into schools. Now, listen, I'm not saying every single one of them is buying into it, and I'm not saying every single one of them is pushing this. And I will also mention again, this is still in the very early stages of being implemented. It's not heavy in all states, in all school districts, right? There's different levels of implementation, in different areas. But this.
If I could just mention one thing on that. Don't think of this as a Democrat or a Republican issue. Don't think of this, this is only in blue states. I've seen it in red states, blue states. It's coming. It's being implemented everywhere in different versions of it. And in some of the private schools in the red states, I keep hearing about a right-wing version of this. A right-wing doing the same kind of bullshit thinking, but putting a right-wing spin on it. So it's an overcorrection because, they're teaching my kids this. I'm going to teach them at home, and I'm going to teach them this stuff, right? So it's or a private school or a faith-based school. There is a smaller thing on the right. It's not nearly as big, and it's not nearly as institutionalized, even though I hate that term. But yeah, I keep an eye on everything, and just don't think, I'm in a Republican state, this is not going to affect me. It can be anywhere. North Carolina is the latest one I saw.
Oh yeah, North Carolina. So obviously I've been trying to raise awareness about it, and so some teachers and parents throughout the country have come across some of the stuff I've been putting out, and they've been reaching out to me, right? And so like you said, Washington State, obviously, I'm sure you're aware about, California, Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, Michigan,
parts of Texas,
Kansas, New York, Texas. So exactly what you said. This is not a partisan issue. It's not a regional issue. This is happening, really all over the place, at some level or another, and it's going to continue to grow. So I mentioned how how the teachers are starting to be kind of indoctrinated into it. At the same time, what's happening is they're indoctrinating the students. They're trying to create these student equity leaders, right? They're having workshops and conferences to put this mindset into the students, and then and the hope is, and it's actually beginning to happen, that the students will be starting to push their own schools to advocate for for equity, for this whole worldview that we're talking about. So they're going directly after the kids, and they're anticipating, and which will happen, is that they will then take over, take the baton and have more people pushing this.
Okay, because I spoke with Carrie. I think you spoke with her yourself, Carrie Smith, and I was trying to tell her this quote and I couldn't find it, and I found it, and it's, okay, when an opponent declares, "I will not come over to your side," I calmly say, "Your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community." And that's a quote from Hitler. And I'm not comparing these people to Nazis and whatever, but that mindset, or the mindset of the Jesuits, like, give me the child at 7 and I'll give you the man at 12 or whatever it said.
Sure.
This is what it is. Like, you can mold that young kid however you want, and if you start him off on this path, I can't remember what high school it was in. I think it was in Brooklyn or maybe the Bronx, but it was in Manhattan. It was in New York City, where they were on strike because they were demanding some of this stuff.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump in here just real quick. So I talk about these student conferences and trying to get them indoctrinated into this. So the school you're talking about, literally there was an equity youth summit held at this school over the summer, right? Then in the fall, there's this whole I don't want to say meltdown. I don't want to exaggerate. It's not to the extent of Evergreen yet, but it's heading in that direction. We're waiting for the canoe to show up. But there was a student strike. There was a walkout over this whole issue, over racial issues, and they had a whole list of demands that they submitted to the school administration about having more training on implicit bias training, and more diversity and more equity and more culturally responsive education coming into the school, right? So the students, literally months after there was this equity student summit at the school, it kind of plays itself out. Now, I'll be honest with you too. I certainly believe that there's these students are being egged on and led by or kind of pushed by some of these people behind the scenes that are also pushing it.
Oh, totally. Okay, you mentioned Evergreen. If you see the videos that Benjamin Boyce did or Mike Nana did,
yes,
or that little clip that Mike Nana, he happened to be at Sarah Lawrence when they had the same kind of revolt. They took over the administration office. In both those clips, you can hear the students saying straight out, "You taught us to do this." They taught the kids to be activists, not to be students. They taught them what was wrong. They taught them to disrupt and overthrow everything. So, again, going back to a religious framework, I equate it to like the myths in Judaism about the golem. So you make the golem to do your bidding, and then in the story it comes back and kills its creator. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're coming back and they're taking out the thing that created them, because when you say problematize, it is that. It is to find a problem in everything. You look, no matter what someone says, you look for the problem in it.
Yeah, and it just, through concept creep and it just continually, a problem that was never a problem before now becomes a problem. And then once that's a problem, the next problem that was never a problem before but now becomes a problem. It just continually, it's a never-ending, it's a never-ending process, which eventually, like you said, and this is why, I think there's a lot of things that play into why it's difficult for teachers to speak out and raise awareness about this. Now, I have, some teachers, reaching out to me, some of them are anonymous, some I know who they are, and they're raising concerns about it. But in my view, if they don't start raising concerns about this, eventually, it's gonna eat their profession. It's gonna make, going to school and teaching in this environment is going to be it's not going to be good. Let's put it that way. I mean, it's going to be between the conflict, student behavior problems are going to increase because it gets more difficult to discipline students because you're afraid of being called a racist or a bigot. I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Okay, but also like the urge, like anything that comes out of any of this stuff, anyone I've spoken to or had interactions with who is, a devotee of critical race theory or intersectionality or, gender theory, queer studies, any of this stuff, right? Their first reaction is, don't read anything that contradicts this. Cancel people that, like, that's it. The only way to do it is to cut everything. It acts like a cult. If there's toxic people in your life, cut them out, right? If there's people like this, cut them out. And so what happens when these kids, are taught, well, okay, so if I read Darwin and I read about biology, well, no, Darwin had some bad ideas, and he had some silly ideas, and John Stuart Mill, you can make a case that he was racist and whatever, but John Stuart Mill's idea on free speech were great, right? You don't have to take everything else. But if you throw this stuff out, I was just speaking to a friend of mine about this. Like, who's going to hold that up? Like, right now, if liberal Western democracies, if you want to call them that, because Australia falls under that, if liberal democracies, secular liberal democracies, built on the Enlightenment, if we don't uphold this stuff, if we don't say we need this, if kids learn that science is wrong and you need it's a white way of knowing and they need a colored way of knowing, we throw away the enterprise of science. Like, who's going to hold it up in the world? Like, it's all lost. Like, the things that have advanced us to where we are now, where you and I, I'm in Montreal, you're in New York State, we're having this conversation, I can have this conversation with someone around the world.
Absolutely.
And, we're throwing away the very stuff that brought us the stuff that is, brought us out of the caves, made our world better, made everything so much better. We're throwing away and we're turning our backs on it. And I'm like, if we do that, who's going to take it up? Like, there's a concern of what's happening to the kids, but there's an overall concern of what's happening to the culture.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I think part of that is, we're kind of living on the fumes and on the progress that was been made, right? And people, I think, are getting complacent, and they have no idea about, really what this new way of thinking, this new ideology that's coming in. It's sneaking in. People aren't paying attention to it, and I think I think that plays a big role in it. And until more people become aware of what's going on, this stuff is just going to continually to spread. How long that's going to take for more people to become aware of it, and what the reaction is going to be, and how that plays out. I mean, that's still to be seen. But we're not even there yet. There's not enough people that know what's going on to even get to that point yet.
Yeah, but I'm looking at people like, okay, I think we're roughly the same age. I'm 50. I'm looking at friends
49.
Looking at friends my age who will say things like, who will talk about how whiteness is horrible, and they're pushing to have more hate speech laws. And this is in Canada. We don't have a First Amendment here, but they're pushing for more speech restrictions. They're pushing because to them this sounds good. To them, we want to stop hate, and it sounds, this sounds wonderful. So it's like, no, but, and when I push back, I'm like, well, don't you want more free speech? And it's like, why do you want to curtail what you have to say? It's like, but we have to fight X, we have to fight this. And I'm like, it's the wrong way to do it. So even if they don't understand what they're doing, it's like, it's in the schools. I think online, and I think generally it's like people are like, well, it's dying down on Twitter, so it's not that important anymore. It's going to go away. We're going to laugh at it.
I've seen some of that. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but it's dying down on Twitter because the people on Twitter are moving on to the next stupid thing. But this stuff, like you said, it's starting in schools. It's already in government. companies are basing, their human resources crap on this. So it's in the society already. It's going to take maybe 10 years to get it out of the society. Like the online thing. Go ahead.
Right,
sorry.
and that's kind of how I see it as well. Like I mentioned kind of the bottom up kind of infiltration of this, and as it's now coming down from the state levels, the state governments, the people in the middle, they're gonna be not even see it coming. They're kind of getting squeezed by it, I think. And by the time they realize what's happening, I think it's going to be so entrenched that it's going to be even a lot more difficult to address. That's how I see it. I mean, I made the analogy in my videos, about I kind of refer to it as a boa constrictor, right? It slowly kind of starts wrapping itself around you. It's kind of around the perimeter. Maybe you notice it, maybe you're not that concerned about it. I mean, it's kind of a stretch, but then next thing you know, it's a little closer to you, and then it snug, before you know it, it's wrapped around you, and then it starts slowly squeezing, and so it's a slow, there's all different other, expressions, the frog in the boiling pot, right? The Trojan horse thing, right? Whatever it is,
the frog in the boiling pot. That's what I felt like, because I come back in 2014 and I see this, and everyone's walking around like it's normal. And even as it gets harsher and harsher and more crazy, people are still. I'm like, so what? You guys were slowly seeing this happen, and it was little by little, right? Like, don't you want to fight racism? And it's a little bit of creep, very slowly. I'm like, so it happened over 13 years, but for me, it was like I just jumped right in, and I'm like the frog that's squealing because I just got thrown into the boiling water. And
you're jumping right into the hot water, and I'm being squeezed right off the bat.
That's what I felt like. I'm like, so okay, this is getting way off this, but like something like the censorship thing. When Disney Plus first came out, Disney always does this. They put movies in the archive, so when they release it, they can sell a bunch of copies, right? But now they altered some movies, and then they put warnings up in front of others. So like I think they said they're never going to play Song of the South again, right? Like Zippity Doo-Dah and all that, right?
Yep.
And some of them they altered a little bit. Some of them they put, this has culturally insensitive stuff because it was made in, which fine, you want to put that in. That'll explain to kids this was wrong, but this is what we thought back then, and I'm okay
context.
with it. Yeah, I'm okay with that. But actually changing it and taking it out, I joked around with a couple of friends. This was just this past summer, and I said, okay, I go, we all have not all, but e-readers are becoming more ubiquitous, right? So let's say 100 years down the road, all there are e-readers. Paper books are a thing for libraries and museums, and no one really has them. And the general consensus is we only say N-word. We don't actually say the word, right? And that's the consensus now. But let's just say it's gone even further. So whoever's running like all the e-readers, let's say Amazon, like their Kindle, right? Amazon puts out an update. So yeah, we've got a new update for your e-reader. We're going to update whatever. So you update your Kindle. Same time as it updates it, it goes into every book that has that word and changes it to N-word. Now, if it's all digital, it's easy to do. Like Disney just did it. Like I showed you, it's simple to do. So, it's people keep saying 1984 was a warning, not a fucking user guide. I'm worried about little things like this. Yes, it's paranoia. Yes, it's tinfoil hat stuff, but the technology's there. It's not hard to do. But luckily now, you can still go out and buy Huck Finn and read. And again, I don't want any of these words to be people running up and down this. And I'm afraid of that. Like people are going to run up and down the street and just say the most horrific things as a blowback to this, right? And
right.
Yeah. The overcorrection
on the reaction.
Yeah. And so I mean, like I said, I know this is getting a little off, but like these are some of my concerns about this stuff. Like the stuff with the kids is horrible, but if you train kids like this as they grow up, these downtrend, like these downstream things are going to happen. Like this is what eventually will happen. We're going to lose all our freedoms.
Yeah, I mean that's where, I mean that's the trajectory that we're on. I mean, So that's why, raising awareness is, I think, the main priority right now. If you don't mind, let me just jump back into.
Yeah, sure,
I think it's important for people to hear some specific, things that are being put out there, right? So I was talking earlier about, the student equity leaders and how, students are being indoctrinated into this. So a conference that's open to teachers and students, right? It's called the Decolonizing Education Conference, right? So so right off the bat, you can have you can imagine what this is all about. But here's some workshops that teachers and students can attend, and in fact, I believe some students were actually teaching some of these. I don't know if they were teaching the specific ones that I'm going to mention, but obviously they're trying to develop the students to be able to present this stuff, right? So you can attend an Interrupting Whiteness in Education workshop, right? Examine and dismantle white supremacy culture in middle school advisory. Let me see, exploring anti-racist pedagogy in Eurocentric learning environments. Let me see here, dealing with white fragility and its impacts on people of color. Decentering whiteness through literature, creating classroom and school communities that work to dismantle white supremacy. These are where you go to a weekend conference, and these are the workshops that that teachers and students are attending. So like I said, I think it's important for people to hear it, and certainly I try to, in my videos, I try to show what I can, because I think as like when people see it, when they see it in writing, when they actually hear the speakers presenting this stuff, I think it starts to sink in more as to what it is and what's going on. Not only that, right? So they also are pushing to have the students become kind of like co-designers of the curriculum, right? So not only are they indoctrinating the students into this worldview, right? They are pushing to have them be co-designers of the curriculum, and there's also a movement of having the teachers kind of step back and have the students have a bigger role in deciding what they want to learn and how they want to learn it, right? And this is referred to in the New York framework. It's referred to as student-centered learning, right? Now, if you read that in a document, we're going to have student-centered learning, right? If you're a parent or whatever, and you see that come across, you're like, whatever, student-centered learning, right? Okay. Sounds reasonable. First of all, what are you going to? What would you ever focus your
Just to interrupt for a second, like that, when you said student-centered learning, if I was a parent and I read that, okay, so this is learning that's centered around the student. This is learning that is focused on the student. It sounds great. Right. It sounds wonderful.
Right. It sounds wonderful. But at the same time, if you think about what the hell else would the learning be centered on other than the student? So it's ridiculous on every aspect. But it's not ridiculous when you understand what they actually mean. Right? It actually means the students being in more control of what they want to learn and how they want to learn it. So so they have all of these moving pieces are kind of happening at the same time, right? And having a compound effect, right, of how this is slowly building. Slowly, well, I say slowly. It's actually spreading pretty quickly, but in terms of all the different aspects and how it's being implemented, building on top of each other and connecting. So that's part of how the students are being indoctrinated into this. So if you don't mind, I want to jump into some definitions and some things that are in these frameworks that are coming out of the
sure.
state education departments and what's being pushed out. So and obviously my focus is in New York. I know more specifically of what's in the New York framework, but the same ideas, the same concepts are in frameworks throughout many different states, throughout the country. So anyway, so if you're going to implement culturally responsive education, right, for me, a primary definition, a thing that you want to understand of what it means is, what are they referring to by culture, right? And so, like in James Lindsay and Peter Rogozzian's book, How to Have Impossible Conversations, one of the things they talk about is, make sure that you're talking about the same thing before you get too far down the road, right? You understand what you're meaning by certain words, right? So culture in the New York framework is defined as the multiple components of one's identity, including ways of thinking, ways of knowing, and forms of expression, right? So, and also with that, no culture is superior, no culture is better than any other culture, right? So just in that definition alone, you have a lot of things going on, right? You have intersectionality, right? Because when you're talking about the multiple components of one's identity, right? That's all the different categories and things that whoever wants to identify them, put themselves in, whatever group they want to put themselves in, or multiple groups. That's how they're infusing intersectionality into this framework. They're also, standpoint epistemology, right? When you're talking about ways of knowing and ways of thinking, right? So different groups have different ways of knowing, and you or I might not have access to another person's way of knowing and what, and ways of thinking. And also the cultural relativity concept it's all baked in to that definition of culture, right? But if you're just reading this as a parent, or first of all, parents aren't reading this stuff for the most part, obviously, unless they come across it somewhere and happen to look at it. But parents, teachers aren't really reading this stuff. They're too busy, like we talked about before. People are too busy, right? But even if they are reading it, it looks relatively reasonable enough without knowing the background stuff. It looks relatively reasonable enough to kind of let it pass, right? Okay, it's culture responsive education. Culture is multiple components about your identity, whatever. But when you understand the intersectionality theory in it, the standpoint epistemology, the cultural relativity, that's all baked into this. You can just see the problems.
Okay, and just one thing on this, the intersectionality and the identity thing, right? So, and like I said, in middle schools and stuff, this was in the after 2013. Now it's coming in through K through 12, and in Canada, in 2 provinces, it started in 2017. Now it's in 3 provinces, fully K through 12, and it's sprinkled here and there in other provinces. But now, this is something that's new, and it's relatively new, and this is only at the university level or people, PhDs writing papers and stuff, right? So BIPOC. So you have people of color, now you have BIPOC. BIPOC is Black and Indigenous people of color. So First it was white people oppress people of color, so white people step back, let people of color come up front. Now it's brown people weren't as oppressed as much as Black and Indigenous people, so white people step back, white people step to the absolute back, brown people step to the middle back, and Black and Indigenous people step up to the front because they were the most oppressed. Now and this was in the last year, maybe 18 months I started reading this, and I'm not an academic and I don't go into this, right? But in the last couple of months I started seeing, and this is coming straight out of post-colonial theory, which is Black people, even though they were brought over as slaves, they were brought over by the colonizers. The slave labor helped the colonizers, so they aided in the colonization, and they helped oppress the indigenous people. The slaves helped them.
Here we go.
Okay, now
this is
Okay, so this is breaking it down where it's telling you who you should hate, and it's creating those divisions. Now, this is nowhere near the elementary school level. I'm not worried about, but if this keeps going, 5 years down the road, is that going to come into the curriculum where they're going to tell you how exactly you're supposed to hate each color And
they're being primed with the fundamentals of this theory early on, right? Yeah. So as they get older and learn more, the new, the further along it goes, they're already primed for it.
It's nuts, and it's like when I see my friends talking about this stuff, and I try to tell them, and they're like, "Oh no, but it's I'm like, you're not fighting racism." Like this, telling people that indigenous people, like slaves, had it better off than indigenous people. This is not, and this is not. It shouldn't be a fight. Like slavery was an awful thing. What happened to in Canada, say First Nations or Native Americans? Like what happened there was horrific. Like why are you trying to compare these two? And why are you trying to there's not a lot of Native Americans left, right? Black people, I think in the United States like 13%. I think Native Americans is about 3 to 6%, something like that.
Okay.
Why are you trying to get them to fight against each other? Why not
And what you're saying is how it it continually divides. It continually separates. I'm sure however many years from now, right? They're going to break that down even further, and there's going to be slaves that supported colonialism, and and slaves that didn't, or indigenous folks that they're going to problematize it some way or another. It's a never ending process.
Yeah. Okay. And when sorry, I know you keep, but I just keep wanting to throw in a little example so people can maybe understand it. Like this, the work is never done, right? And again, to bring this back to a religious framework, it doesn't matter how nutty Ken Ham, I don't care how crazy he is religiously, he at least offers you salvation, right? You can go to heaven. Like there's a reward. There is nothing here. The work is never done. You always have to engage. I can see in some sense buying the religious story because it gives you the reward, the afterlife. I don't see buying this story. Like, okay,
right.
I still get it.
So let's because we touched on it. You brought it up. The concept of being anti-racist, right? Yeah. So, and I think that's important for people to understand. When I imagine when people hear the term being anti-racist, they probably think that they are anti-racist. They're not racist, so they consider themselves an anti-racist. But no, that's not what it means, right? There's there's no such thing as not being racist, right? In this ideology, no. It's either you are a racist or you are anti-racist. And what anti-racist means is you are kind of nonstop, always looking for the racism that exists, and it's not that
you're always calling out privilege. You're always on the offensive, and. Okay, I don't know if you want to get into this, but allyship. I see a lot of my friends doing this too. I'm an ally, and they don't know what it means. Being an ally is just not being on someone's side. It's not just saying, yeah, okay, we'll support whatever. It's you put yourself, if you're white, you get out of the way and let people of color ahead of you. Some people say go as far as give up your position. You have to continuously be anti-racist. It's not just good enough for you to go to a demonstration. It's not just good enough for you to share information. You have to continuously go out there and check your privilege and fight against it. And if you don't, if you're just an average decent person who's not racist, who will defend your friends if something happens, who might go to a protest, might go to a speech or something like this, try to inform themselves, you're called a good
Not
white.
Enough.
Yeah, you're a good white. You're just showing how good you are, so you can let your racism. You have cover to be racist yourself. And and all these terms are so horrible. Like a good white. Come on. And these to call themselves anti-racist is just it's like Antifa saying they're anti-fascist. It's the same nonsensical crap.
It's yep, word games.
Yeah.
It's different. It's the words have completely different meaning. Almost opposite meanings of what you would expect them to what you would expect them to mean. So you mentioned earlier about the thing with time and with students working late or showing up late or whatever it is, right? So literally at one of these conferences in New York State, the keynote speaker did a whole spiel on this in terms of there's different cultures have different ideas of time. There's precise time and there's relative time, right? It's like precise time means you're governed by the clock. Relative time means you're governed by what's going on and how how you want to respond to it. So I mean, these are the ideas that are out there, right? This is what's being presented.
Yeah, like whatever. Like go back to the early 2000s. I mean, even before that, go back to the 70s. I think you could see it. You'd have black comedians talking about white people time, and black people time. And then I was born in India. Like I grew up with a lot of my family's Indian, like some Pakistani, whatever. And we joke around it. It's like brown people time or white people time. It's like,
but as you know, right? I mean, right. Listen, all different people have different concepts of time, and it doesn't matter what color your skin is, right? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, but when they start like talking about it seriously in terms of allowing late work or creating policies on different cultures' understanding of time, I mean, you can see how that's it just gets it gets crazy.
But okay, I mean, school is supposed to prepare you for the world. Now, I think elementary school and even high school should be more about, obviously you got to teach the basics, teach a read, right? But once you get the basics down, so like around third grade, I think it should turn more to a critical thinking. Like, obviously you have to teach kids, trigonometry, like they have to advance, but it should be taught more about how to think, not what to think. And it should be to prepare them for university, which will then prepare them for the world. But it should be preparing them for getting ready for the world. So unless you expect the world to be, well, gee, boss, I knew I was supposed to do this guy's heart surgery today, but I felt like I'm going to do it tomorrow because I'm on a different time than you are. The world won't work. No, but I mean, yeah, whatever. We just figured this plane could land at a different time, so like you're not going to have air traffic controllers looking at different times, like culturally time-sensitive air traffic controllers. Like, what the hell?
Right, and of course, when they're talking about that, they're I'm sure wanting to implement it in their own in their own subjective area, certain areas. We can use precise time in this area, and we want to use relative time in this area. Who knows? I have no idea. It's crazy. The whole idea is it's nuts. It's nuts. But you talked about
okay, just one little really stupid thing, the relative time thing. There was a paper from the 90s. I'll try to dig it up for you. But it was argued that the theory of relativity was misogynistic because the speed of light was masculine. So the relative time.
Of course it was.
This was from the 90s, man. The speed of light was misogynistic. Or the theory of relativity. Just when you said relative time, because
Yeah. But that's how it's being presented. So you touched on critical thinking, right? So that's another thing just to keep in mind, right? When you and I think about critical thinking, right? Teaching kids how to think for themselves, or to research a topic and learn from the various different sides of it, and kind of start to come to your own conclusions, right? Not always just take the word of your teacher or from one source or whatever, right? To develop that critical thinking, right? That's how I think of it, and that's how you were describing it. And I think you notice as well what's happening is critical thinking is you know, it's being looked at now as being critical, problematizing whatever particular subject that is being studied, right? To be critical, you know, to.
Well, I'm going to push back a little against that, because I think they're not using it. They're not saying critical thinking. That's why they call it critical theory.
Well, so and that's just real quick. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, right? You have the background to understand some of that, right? When you're talking, you know, when lay people hear these terms, I think there's the vagueness, the overlap creates a situation where one can turn into the other very easily. Mm-hmm. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, but just like, because to them, critical thinking is whiteness. It's a white way of thinking, right? So they say, oh, critical thinking is using critical wrong. Whereas, you know, you have to, for them, it's to criticize everything and find problems in everything. But yeah, so, I mean, to them, it is a white way of thinking. Critical thinking is the tool of the white person. It's like I don't know if you ever read Audre Lorde's paper, so I think it was in '84, you know, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
I'm familiar with it. I haven't read it, but I've heard the concept.
Again, she had a very legitimate claim. It was about a meeting she went to at the UN. It was about women of color being oppressed in Africa. And she said, look, it was, you know, in the whole committee, there was 2 people that weren't white, you know, and she goes, only 1 woman that wasn't white. So if a UN committee, and you might not have the people, like the experts, you know, there who are discussing the policy, but at least have a room full of people from that region who've experienced, you know, the issues to talk about, right? Like, she was a very valid point. But then she was talking more about capitalism, but you cannot use the tools of the master to take down the master's house, because the master's house is built by those tools. And that can only be said by someone who doesn't understand critical thinking, who doesn't understand science, who doesn't understand reason. Those tools themselves, like, those systems are set up with the tools to bring themselves down. Like, if you use the scientific method, and, you know, Einstein showed where Newton got gravity wrong, it didn't wipe away Newton, but, you know, Einstein could have won a Nobel Prize. Like, when you're like you disprove our best theories, we'll give you our highest reward. It's there, and they're using the tools of censorship and oppression. Like, these are the oldest tools of the oldest masters who had, you know, kept everyone down, and the tools that liberated the entire world, that are there for anyone to use, they're shitting on. And it's just, you know, sorry, rant over.
No, you hit a lot of good points, and that's what it is. That's what's being brought into the schools, you know, and like I said, I mean, I have a real pessimistic view on this. You know, I'm out here, I'm trying to raise awareness. You know, I wish I didn't have to do this, right? And certainly I don't have to do it, right? I didn't mean to phrase it that way. But I see it as a major problem. I'm spending the time to try to put stuff together, to try to raise awareness. It's a major concern. It's definitely a major concern.
Okay, frankly, myself too. Like, I've been on leave for the last 18 months or so. It's nothing serious, just a medical thing. Like, it's a very, very tiny medical thing, but where I was living, they couldn't treat it, right? So if I didn't have this time, I wouldn't have been able to read as much of this stuff as I did. You know, I would have still been floundering around, like, because the Jordan Peterson thing, right? Like, I mean, he kept calling it postmodernism, and I'm like, this is not, because I'd read some postmodernism, and I'm like, this is not quite what it was. And okay, my issue with him was not so much, and like, this is completely, it doesn't really, I don't think he looked at it as deeply as he said he did. Like, when he had that debate with that guy in Toronto, Swazik or something like that, I forget his name. You know, it was a debate on it was a debate on Marxism, and it's like, well, I haven't really read Marx. It's like, well, so, you know, can I really? And again, like, Douglas Murray had a really good term for it. He called it Jesus smuggling. You know, I don't care if you're religious or not. It doesn't bother me. But when he, just say it outright. You like that system and you want to build. Like, fine. At least I know what I'm saying. He's too wishy-washy. He doesn't give you a definitive answer. That's my issue with him. Not like I think he's a bad person. I think he's a horrible. It's none of that stuff. I just don't find his arguments convincing, and I find them a little lame. And okay, whatever, his book, I'm not discounting that people might have found some use out of it, but it was a self-help book, man. Like Anthony Robbins could have written that. Like those are my issues with him, and like this is like has nothing to do with what we were talking about. But like I think that like his tack on it wasn't 100%. But I mean, he makes some good points against it, and he makes some valid arguments. Like
and the idea that he and a lot of other people are out there speaking about it and raising awareness is that alone is helpful enough to just start piquing people's interest, to start learning more about it. That's certainly what happened to me and really got me going and got me to dig deeper into it and find out what's going on.
But again, it's you're taking the time, like obviously people like James and Helen and Peter have taken a lot of time in this, and I know like Mike's looking at it, Benjamin Boyce, but the majority of the people I see speaking out against it or speaking out in favor of it, it's bad argumentation on both sides, and it's like I can't, the ones who are against it, I might be for their ultimate goal, but I can't get behind that argumentation. It's just, I don't want the pendulum to go from one crazy to the other. Can we just have it slow down in the middle for a little bit so we can relax and have a barbecue and a pint with some buddies? You know what I mean? Like, can I just be a dumb slob again?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out over the next few years, because it's being aggressively pushed, and unless people are willing to stand up and push back against it, and so I understand what you're saying, right? There's a concern about the overcorrection, but at what point does some strength in pushback cross over into an overcorrection? We're not even at the awareness level that we need to be right now. So that's not really. I'm not as concerned about that right now. I'm concerned about how quickly it's spreading, and that so many people are really that it's completely under the radar. And listen, I'll be honest with you. As far as I'm concerned, like this is a national scandal. Like, this is a scandal happening under our noses. And I think it has a lot to do with the power of political correctness really suppressing people from even the ones that the few that know about it and are concerned about it and would want to push back against it. It's suppressing their ability to speak out about it. Now, whether people should, individual people should have, the strength to stand up and do that. Some people refer to, either administrators or teachers that don't speak out against it, that know about it, maybe as cowards. That might be the case in some situations, but at the same time, right, they're under a lot of pressures to kind of go with the flow. There's a lot of political correct pressure.
No, but at the same time, like, I have friends who tell me, "Oh, I wish I could talk about that. I can't because I'm white," and they're afraid of getting fired, whatever. And these teachers and administrators, I get that too. Like, they've got that fear, and it's people are afraid. Forget like teachers and administrators. Everyone's afraid to get out and talk about this because am I going to get canceled on something? People are going to gang up on me on Facebook or whatever. Like, the average person doesn't realize how bad this can get, and so they're worried about it, or they see people get rid of J.K. Rowling because she said something reasonable.
Right.
They see this insanity, and it's just like, huh? What are you talking about? And I can see where people are worried, and okay, that's the overcorrection I'm worried about. I'm worried about okay, forget school then. I'm going to homeschool my kids. Forget university. We're going to have, people just discount expertise where expertise is important, and we're diluting all these things. Like, I don't want to see a country where it's Candace Owens running against Cortez. Like, imagine that. Like, you had a choice between Candace Owens and Cortez. Not that like Trump is some genius or whatever, but I mean, like, both of those people are the exact same thing. They're idiotic. The focus of their hate is something different, but they're just as dumb. Each of them. I think both of them are stupid. I think both of them are idiotic. I think neither of them has anything of any value to say. And that's what I'm afraid of. Like, I'm afraid of people just to be edgy are going to say stupid things. People just to be edgy are going to say the N-word on the street. Just to be edgy, they're going to, start, not being transphobic, but just just yelling things at trans people just to be edgy. Oh, I don't really mean it. I'm just, that's the kind of overcorrection I'm really worried about.
Yeah, well, I think what really has to eventually happen, and this is one of the concerns, because I don't think it's going to be an easy thing to get to happen, is people in the middle, people who are reasonable and have to use Jonathan Rauch's terms, the liberal ideals, those fundamental concepts, who are not dogmatic in either one of the spectrum of views, right, are going to have to start standing up and pushing back against this. But there's a lot of reasons why that's going to be very difficult to do, and I'm not optimistic that that's going to happen. Not anytime soon, anyway.
Yeah.
Because it comes down to, at the same time, like I said earlier, the threat level doesn't seem immediate enough at this point, really, to raise to the level where people are going to be willing to sacrifice their time, their efforts, maybe even their money to focus and start pushing back against it. So until the concern raises to that high enough of a threat level, it's going to continue to spread.
But I mean, like, I think, okay, this is in schools now, but I mean, it's been out in, kids will see it on the internet, kids will see it. Kids are a lot more online than the average adult, right? So they're seeing a lot more of this stuff. So like that rise in depression, that rise in anxiety, that rise in all kinds of psychological problems that are coming into kids, right? And you keep hearing about it, like, teenagers being, or like kids like 11 or 12 being given like a cocktail of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicine. I'm like, where's all that coming from, right? You're creating anxious kids. Like, if that doesn't alarm people, I don't know what does.
Well, I'll be honest with you, with the social and emotional learning initiatives that are in schools as well. I mean, in my opinion, you're going to continue to see increases in those issues, and in anxiety, depression issues, and also this culturally responsive education, ethnic studies, equity mindset is also being infused into these social and emotional learning programs. So, like, this is all kind of happening at the same time, and it's developing this perfect storm of problems that are going to be with kids and be with the system for a while. That's how I see it. I mean, time will tell, right? I mean, we'll see how it goes. But to wait till it gets to a point where it's beyond repair, like, I can't do that. I have to start speaking out about it.
Yeah, I'm just the same thing here. I'm just trying to bring, I want more people to know about it. I want my friends who have kids to know about it. I want, if you're just concerned about general society, and again, I'm really concerned about some things. Like, I don't Okay, and I don't blame this on Trump. Like all these, Trump empowered these people. No, like Trump got in, and these people, yes, so, like the assholes down in Charlottesville and all that crap, right? They felt, okay, whatever, he gave us some legitimacy because he's fighting back against this shit, and it is shit. But again, it's the wrong way to do it. So you had this building up in colleges for a while, and then, like I said, in junior and senior year of high school. So you already had kids who were like experienced it, and they're like, "Fuck you!" Like I don't want to be told that I'm evil because I'm white. So they became one of those assholes in khaki pants carrying tiki torches in Charlottesville.
Sure, that's going to be in effect.
Okay, and okay, what those guys did, I blame on them. But if you keep telling someone they're evil, at one point or other, people are like, "Yeah, I guess I am," then, right? And it's we had a handle on a lot of this stuff. Like KKK was always there, white supremacist groups were always there, but they didn't feel a need to come out, and it wasn't that Trump brought them out. They felt, I guess, safe or whatever because of Trump, and this is not even an indictment of Trump. I don't like Cheeto Man. I think he's a complete disaster, but they just felt, okay, we got a guy who's standing up to them, so we can then, we can stand up to them ourselves. But they don't look at, they think of, there is a reason why these people are standing up for themselves. You push them into a corner. Just, if you came back just a little bit, the ones who weren't completely crazy, you could probably talk them back down. It's,
So listen, so so you had James Lindsay on your podcast.
I spoke with James. I spoke with Helen.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So and I remember you guys talking about the upcoming election. So I mean, let's look at it from both different angles, right? If Trump wins, and you guys discussed this to some extent, right? If Trump wins, that's going to be proof, to the folks that have this ideology, this worldview that everything's white supremacy, everything is power imbalances, all this stuff, privilege and oppression. That's going to be proof that they were right. So it's only going to amplify and energize them to push this stuff more. If a Democrat wins, right, I'm going to see it. Well, I'm not going to see it. I think it's going to be seen as proof that their efforts in promoting this worldview that was right, and they're now amplify and energize them to continue to push it. And on the other side, like you said, there's going to be a backlash. So we're in the pregame of this insanity, as far as I'm concerned. As crazy as it is now, I think there's going to be I don't see it ending, anytime soon.
Okay, and this is the racism stuff, right? Just to give you an example of this. If you're a white person, you're supposed to, when they say listen to people of color, it's listen, shut up and listen, and do what we tell you, because you do not experience racism. You do not know what racism is. So you should just take my word for it if I say something's racist. And if you ask me to explain how it's racist, you are then demanding my emotional labor, and that's again racist. So you have no way of knowing how it's racist. Asking me to explain it to you is racist in itself, so you can never find out. You'll never know why it's racist. You'll never know what racism is. It's a no-win situation. So what you're talking about, if Trump wins or loses, Evergreen College, after that meltdown happened, they went full on social justice, even more than they were before, and they're just doubling down and doubling down. Their enrollment started dropping. So if enrollment drops, it will grow to prove that white supremacy forced them to shut. If they win, if it doesn't, then then white people are fed up with white supremacy and they want to fight it. No matter what you do, it's white supremacy. No matter what you do, it's whiteness. If it's intersectional feminism, no matter what you do, it's the patriarchy and misogyny. If it's gender theory, it's no matter what you do, it's transphobia. If it's queer theory, no matter what you do, it's homophobia. It's they take very important issues. This is the biggest problem with it. intersectionality was like I said, the idea was very good. So where a woman, where if you're black and you're a woman, you face different kinds of oppression. When you are a black woman, you face a third kind of oppression that no one else knows. And it makes sense, and there's some important stuff there. But then it takes something very complicated, and it's just always a univariant answer. It's racism, it's whiteness, it's misogyny, it's homophobia. It's all it is just that, and nothing else. And it's the worst way to deal with this shit.
And that's the dilemma, right? That's the dilemma. How does this play out? Certainly with social media, you have a perpetual problematizing machine on a mass scale. I don't have the answer for how it's going to play out, but I don't see it. I don't see things settling down anytime soon. And I think just more and more people just have to wake up to what's going on, and more people have to get involved. And that's why I'm so concerned about the K-12 education system is as more and more of these kids are indoctrinated into this ideology at such a young age. Like you said before, as they get older and other concepts are introduced to them, they're already primed and prepped to accept them. So listen, I'll be honest with you. That's why I'm focusing so much on the younger education, right? Because first of all, that's where it can start to be turned around, right? I think you can start to turn it around. With the younger grades, stop teaching this stuff in the younger grades, but if we don't have some alternative method being taught to these kids, then that's what they're being taught. That's what they're being indoctrinated into.
Like I saw you post about this. There was, because you're going to these meetings and stuff, but there were a couple of meetings where they're discussing curriculum, where at the last minute they close it off to parents. Right? It's like they're trying to do this in secret. They're not trying, like when you're teaching this to kids, and if you want, they're doing it because people might push back. But like what you're saying, like we have to give them something else. Let's not do something crazy where you don't have anything else lined up. You can't just create a vacuum, right? You can say go back to what we were doing before, and we'll come up with something new again, right? But like when these guys talk about breaking down the system, what are they going to break down the system? What are they going to replace it with? They don't have a replacement.
That's exactly right. That's what is their end game besides tearing everything down, right? Exactly what you're saying. There is no plan, or their plan is once they're in power to tell everybody what to do. That's their plan.
Frankly,
so the meeting that you were talking about might have been, I'm not exactly sure which one you're talking about.
It was maybe like just after the new year, or it might have been like in November or something like that.
Obviously, we have a whole issue with the vaccine issue, and students having to be vaccinated before they start school, and there was a whole kind of pushback against some of that. Some people that didn't want to have their children vaccinated, and that might have been the one that you were talking about. And
no, this wasn't a vaccination thing. This was specifically about curriculum. It was about curriculum. It wasn't about vaccinations or anything like that. They were talking specifically about curriculum, and then they shut parents out and they wouldn't let them come in and give their concerns. Yeah,
I'm not sure if I posted that. That might have been one a meeting down in New York City. I'm not sure exactly which one you're talking about.
The bottom line is, I should have pulled it up. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's fine. That's fine. The bottom line is, parents have to start learning about this and understand the concepts. Pay attention to what's being taught in their school. So the other thing is too, just kind of real quick, when people see this in writing, when people see occasionally a teacher will assign a worksheet or an assignment, right? and that a student can take home, and parents can actually see what it is. That's when they start raising concerns. That's when they go to the school board. That's when they push back. But I think a lot of this right now is just being taught through classroom. It's through just speaking, through the lectures, through what's going on. What the students are being told, right? I think if and when you start seeing more actual hard assignments come in, right, then you will see parents starting to get worked up about it. That intersectionality worksheet that you might have seen recently, right? Right. Students were actually assigned that, that parity worksheet, and with that, to me, not only is that ridiculous that some teacher or a group of teachers decided that we're going to assign this worksheet to our students. I mean, the bigger issue there is what kind of, school environment, what kind of environment is the education system in now where teachers would even think that ridiculous parity, well, I mean, they didn't realize it was a parity, but that ridiculous worksheet would be okay to assign to students, right? That's what that incident kind of shows me. There's an environment that allows teachers to think that something like that would be even okay to do.
Yeah, and it's like, again, I can't blame individual teachers because I've been following a lot of teachers. I've been speaking to a bunch of them, and I've known this for years. I have friends who are teachers. I mean, they're so overworked themselves that if they're just given a curriculum, it sounds good or whatever, they follow it. They might not, and again, they might not know what's in the background of this stuff, right? Someone who's been teaching for 20 years might not know where this is coming from.
Exactly. Yep. And that's another part of it.
It sounds good, and it's just okay. Just let it go, and So the Will Roosh, he did a talk with someone recently, and the fact that people think school is a right, or it's an obligation, like you expect schools to do everything. So okay, and I mean, I heard the conversation, I really liked it, and that was just one part of it. But I should have, when I spoke to him, I should have given him a little bit of pushback on that. I think we should think of education as a right, and either you educate your kid, like the education is a right of the kids, not of your right. So either you educate your kids, or you agree to let schools do it. But the schools are there to educate your kids, not to form their values and their morals and their ethics. That should come from home, and the schools can teach about how morals can get together to form a society, and as like a civil society or a culture, or whatever. But so I think there's, and again, this is a time thing, and it's no one has time, no one has. We'd harping on this a lot. Like, there needs to be something like. I think we need to go back to a different way of looking at how we look at education, like an older way, not like the old beat the kids and whatever, but like a more grounded way where it's a cooperation between the parents and the teachers. It's not just, oh, you're teaching my kids this, how dare you, or you got to be better at home. Teachers calling child protective services for stupid reasons, like it happens up here, or like there shouldn't be a conflict between teachers and parents. You should be working more together to get the best for your kids.
Well, there's a breakdown. What contributes to that a lot is there's a breakdown in student behavior and student discipline, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but that, to me, that is the core. That's step one. If you're trying to create a school environment, there has to be a level of discipline where kids are coming in to learn, right? I mean, but there's a major problem with the breakdown of student behavior, and there's reluctance for a variety of reasons to discipline students. And this is a major problem. One of the things that every year as a board member, you're allowed to kind of give like suggested board goals for the year, right? And everybody submits them in, and then you narrow them down and you vote on what the board goals want to be for that year. So my second and third year, on the board, my suggested goal was to look at behavior, get a baseline measure of the school climate, of student behavior, because to me, that's like I said before, that's the number one issue. That's a fundamental, that you have to start from a level of discipline. But there's a breakdown. There's a breakdown. That's a whole nother conversation. But that is definitely at the core of, and that also those behavior problems are going to get worse as this culturally responsive education, these ethnic studies come in. For a variety of reasons, that's going to make those problems worse. All of these things are going to combine and compound these problems. So, I mean, like I said before, this is a pessimistic outlook on this, but in my view, it's heading to towards a nosedive.
Oh, totally.
Time will tell. Time will tell. Yeah. If I'm wrong, I'll be the first one to say it. But
I'd be happy to be wrong. I'd be happy to be a complete idiot on this.
Very, very happy to be wrong.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll let you go shortly, but I'll just let you look at this school in England called the Michaela School.
Yes.
Okay.
I've been following it.
Yeah. I spoke with Catherine, the headmistress there, the woman who founded it. Okay, some of her stuff, I think she's a little too, I don't want to call her draconian. I think some things are a little too strict, but it seems to be working, and it's the one rule where kids can't talk in between classes. So you're going from one class to another. She says the kids like it. She says it's discipline, whatever. If it's working, whatever. But at that point, I think that's just a little too much. Mm-hmm. But I like the idea of, okay, you know what? No smartphones. I think that's a damn good idea. Yep. Okay, I understand you wanted kids to have a way to communicate. That's awesome. Kids lost. But one of those old little Nokia telephones, you can text them, you can talk to them. They don't need a smartphone. Little things like that. But they are also going back to a very basic. Okay, it's not corporal punishment or anything like that, but you get detention. They're not going to give you better treatment because you're brown or black or white or whatever, right?
Now you're getting into just real quick. You're getting into the restorative justice, restorative practices form of student discipline. But go ahead, and that's yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what Michaela is doing. And okay, I think they had their first year of exams this past, they just finished the last school year. And so it was their first class that went through from, I think it was finishing high school, their equivalent of finishing high school. And it was some of the best marks, nationwide exam marks, final exams, some of the best in the country were coming from that school. And people, when they were first being founded, these are working class kids, they're poor neighborhoods, they're not going to learn, they're not going to want to do this, blah, 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 and blew everyone out of the water.
Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on it, and I might have confused you a little bit when I jumped in there before. I didn't mean to do that. But when I referred to the restorative justice, restorative practices approach discipline, so I don't know for sure, but I don't think that's what she's using. That's more of a kind of looking at student discipline as a teachable moment, or as looking at why did a student behave this way, and certainly that can work in certain situations, depending on the student, depending on the administrator that is that is giving that discipline to the student. But on a large scale, it breaks down because people don't understand it, and it just breaks down. There's got to be a some type of punishment for misbehaving in class, for whatever the rules of conduct are, for breaking the rules of conduct. There's got to be a strict discipline code. and enforcement. That obviously the enforcement is the key piece.
Yeah, and it's got to be fair. And when like fair in the sense of, little Billy doesn't do his homework, little Billy gets detention. Little Timmy doesn't do his homework. And I think all things being equal, little Timmy didn't do his homework because his grandmother died. That's understandable, right? But little Billy, little Timmy go home. Little Timmy watches TV, doesn't do his homework. Little Billy, whatever reason, doesn't do his homework. One gets punished, the other doesn't. You can't do that. You have to show kids that punishment is fair across the board. Like, you can't show that some people will get punished and others won't. And right, like I said, you do take some things into consideration, traumatic events happening, whatever. But yeah, you have to do, kids have to be shown there's a consequence, and kids have to be shown that everyone will face the same consequences. You can't play favorites.
Right, and I agree with you, but in terms of some of the behavior problems that I'm speaking to, I'm talking about more, even more aggressive behavior, violent behavior. They're seeing an increase in these types of behaviors in the schools, which is obviously causing disruptions of the classrooms. That is actually
some of that. This is
a big problem.
Okay, this isn't this is just going to be you and me talking. Like, obviously, don't expect. Neither of us have expertise in this, right? So you hear a lot of things, like especially here, and I've seen it in the States, where one kid throws a snowball at another kid. Oh my God, that's bullying, that's violence. Kid suspended for throwing a snowball. Like, when we grew up, you'd go out at recess, you'd go out at lunch, you throw snowballs at your friends, you roughhouse, you play. Kids are letting their aggression out, like especially little boys. If you curtail all that, it's going to come out. Like, little kids can't control themselves as well as adults, and most adults can't control themselves. So if you don't go ahead.
Yeah, no, I understand. I agree with what you're saying. Part of this, and this, like I said, it kind of gets into a whole nother conversation. But part of this has to do with the expansion of the designation of students with disabilities to students who are exhibiting behavior problems, right? That aren't related to some type of disability. I mean, they're just acting up. Whatever behavior problems there are. There are students in these cases that are being designated as students with disabilities, right? And so behavior problems are now being looked at more as a disability, right? Versus maybe and depending on the situation, it may be the case. But what I'm saying is that the definition is expanding, and more students who should not be classified under a student with disabilities are being classified under that.
Yeah, like ADHD,
specifically just for a behavior problem.
No, ADHD, like there shouldn't be that many kids with ADHD. It's.
Well, that gets into the whole medicalization of every human emotion.
Yeah. Well, look, man, it's been a lot of fun. Like, I should come back at one point because there is so much to this stuff.
And that's the issue with it. There's so much. There's so much. And I appreciate you having me on, and I I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk to you.
But where can people find your stuff? Where they can follow you? Any links you want to send? You want me to put up? Just send them to me. I'll put them in the description.
Okay. Yeah. So I post most of the stuff on Twitter. I tried to create. I've never been on Facebook. I tried to create a Facebook account. I did. I created a Facebook account. I posted one or two things, but that's a whole nother. Facebook is a whole nother kind of another kind of animal. I just have no interest in Facebook. That's just me. So I don't post too much on there. But I do post most of the stuff on Twitter. I have a handful of videos on YouTube for those who might be interested. I'll be honest with you, I haven't posted in a little while. I got burnt out. I mean, just the amount of time and effort that I was putting into it, the research, and then also, reading the material that we're dealing with is very disturbing and depressing when you're reading it and you're in it for so long. So I had to take a little bit of a break. I plan on trying to get back at it, and now that I have a lot more documents and things that I can show people, because I think that's what really helps. So that's my hope is to start presenting some more of that, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I appreciate the people that have been following along and have been communicating with me, sharing information with me. It's been a big help, and I see more and more people getting involved, and that's the hope piece. That gives me hope. That more people are asking questions and are getting involved and starting to learn more about it. And certainly, like I said before, I appreciate you shedding light on it. I know certainly this isn't the only podcast you've done on this, and the more we can do, the more we can raise awareness, the better.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyways, thanks a lot, and thanks everyone for listening. I'll be back.